Greetings everyone, and welcome to Lucas Brews. In today's video, we're going to be having a little build and review of the Zvezda 1/72nd Scale Panther Ausf D. If you want to have a closer look at the contents of the Zvezda Panther kit, I've previously done an inbox review video, so go check that one out. But for this video, we'll be focusing on the build, which began with giving the parts a wash in some soapy water to remove some of the oil and residue off of the molds, before using a file to remove some excess sprue and flashing off of the lower hull piece. I used a set of side cutters to remove the suspension arms from the sprue, taking care to remove one set of part numbers at a time so as not to mix them up, as some of them are quite individual. The pins that they go into are half crescent moon kind of shapes, so you can't really mix up the direction of the suspension arms provided you've got the correct number, which is convenient. In addition to the various suspension arms, there's also some springs and other small components that also get attached to the sides of the lower hull. The level of detail on the lower hull is really quite nice, although it is probably the most fiddly and complicated part of the kit. There's also a separate piece for the final drive, which the sprocket will later attach to, and as I mentioned, there are a few odd little suspension arms that are slightly different to the others that will only fit in their particular pins, including a special set for the idler wheel. Assembling the suspension on the other side was pretty much the exact same, so I didn't bother doing a video of it and torturing you guys further. However, I will point out that if you look very closely on the underside of the vehicle, on one side the suspension arms travel rearwards and on the other they travel forwards. This may look like a mistake, but it's actually just a quirk of the torsion bar suspension on the Panther. Because of the way the suspension works, there has to be several bars running through the inside of the vehicle, and because of this, the suspension arms can't be placed symmetrically to each other, so the designers of the Panther decided to have one set of arms travel rearwards so that the road wheels align and are symmetrical with each other. Although this is not unique to the Panther, I thought I'd point it out anyways, as it may confuse some people if you're building this kit and notice that your suspension arms look incorrect, but they are in fact fine. Moving on with assembly, I cut out a weird kind of middle section piece that seems to be quite standard on Zvezda snap-fit kits, which appears to help the lower and the upper hulls glue together, or rather snap together. There's also a small section on the back that's designed for the fans that are for the radiators to glue to, and then you can attach the upper hull. I decided, however, to leave my upper hull off until I had painted the radiator fans, but I still removed it from the sprue, gave it a clean up with some files, and etched the panel lines for the driver's vision slit a little bit deeper using a scriber. Following this, I then removed some of the smaller accessory parts for the hull, and then I started to glue some of the finer accessories such as the lights and the travel lock for the gun barrel. I removed the accessories for the rear armoured plate, including the exhausts and the stowage bins on the back of the vehicle, and glued them to the rear plate before then gluing that to the lower hull. As you would hope from a snap-fit kit that's designed to go together without glue, the fit on all the parts was exceptional, and they were nice and tight and didn't really have any gaps or seams that needed filling. I'll talk a little bit more about paint later, but the colour I used for the radiator was Vallejo 70976 Buff. While waiting for it to dry before adding some panel liner to highlight the details, I then started to assemble the turret. I cut all the parts out and carefully sanded the seams, especially on the gun barrel, and then I carefully used a pin and a knife to drill out the hole for the muzzle brake. I then inserted the cannon into its cradle, which holds it into place, and then glued the mantlet onto the cannon barrel. This then locks it into place, and you get the elevation and depression from it. I then glued it to the front of the turret and moved on to working on the commander's cupola. I decided to try using the Making Waves material to try and create some clear vision slits for the commander, since they're just a hole in this kit. However, later on I found that because of how thick the Making Waves texture was, it wasn't really opaque, so I had to paint it anyways. While it was drying, I glued on the base part for the turret, and also attached some of the finer details such as the lifting hooks for the turret to have it lifted off the hull, and also the smoke launchers on the front and sides of the turret. I eventually glued the cupola on to the rear of the turret, and then I decided to improve the smoke launchers by removing the plastic basic ones that you get and replacing them with some thin plastic wire with a small hole in the middle, which looked a bit more realistic. I carefully cut the sections of wire into the sizes I wanted, removed the old plastic knobs, and then superglued the replacements in. Although it's only a subtle difference, I thought it was quite a nice little improvement and it wasn't too difficult to do. I finally applied some of the panel liner onto the now dry radiators to help highlight the details on the fans, before then gluing the upper and the lower hulls together. The two hulls fitted together pretty well, although there was a slight gap between the lower glacis plate and the front plate. Moving on to the running gear for the tank, I removed the sprockets very carefully, making sure not to remove any teeth by accident, and then I gave them a slight clean up with the sprue cutter before gluing them and their two halves together. And with the sprocket wheel completed, it was time to move on to the road wheels. And of course, being a late war German vehicle with interleaving road wheels, you know the assembly of the wheels is going to be nice and simple, right? Joking aside, Zvezda have actually done a really nice job simplifying the road wheel assembly for this kit. You basically have two halves of the road wheels which are sandwiched together, so you get detail on both sides where it would be visible, and then on the outside are four separate wheels which are used to pin the track into place. I decided, however, for the sake of making painting and weathering easier, to instead glue the wheels together and build the track as an assembly and then glue it to the side of the hull when it was finished. I basically glued the two halves of the wheels together, and after making sure they fitted, set them aside to paint, and then I moved on to assembling the idler wheel. At this stage I discovered that you couldn't put the D-shackles onto the front towing mounts with the fenders the way they were. With the Panther they could either be folded up out of the way when towing, or in most cases the crew would just remove them. Since it was on the Boxer, I decided to just remove the excess of the fender using a set of side cutters, since I thought it looked a bit nicer with them cut down and it meant I could have the D-shackles on the towing mounts. I then used the side cutters to cut down some of the sections of the sprue so that I could use them as small handles for painting some of the parts I hadn't glued onto the tank, such as the side skirts and the road wheels, and then it was time to paint the model.